Yes, good morning, people, while students are still joining in. And of course, the huge confusion as to whether we should be starting offline or online. I would say we are partially offline, we are partially online because you may be at your own places, but your teacher is in the college and conducting the lecture from the department right now. And without any delay, we need to uh, get on with the procedures. Just a moment, let me come to that particular slide. So this is where we were yesterday. We've spoken about the interrelationships, about the three major non-living spheres and the one living sphere, and the fourth sphere, non-living, which is being used these days because it has shown to have an influence on a number of systems around us, the cryosphere. To start with the classification of the subject, you can see that normally we find it divided into two groups. I'll start from here. Geography divided into physical geography, human geography, and economic geography. Now you'll see that why has economic geography joined the company of these two, which initially are supposed to be the major or basic divisions. If you remember, I had said in an earlier lecture that physical geography is the non-living part on the planet and human geography is the living part on this planet, or the man part, or the human part, I would say. Over the period of time, you'll see that human geography has involved a lot of economics, I would say, and that's why economic geography, which is something related to all the economic activities that man performs, is something that of late is being regarded as an important branch and thus being studied separately. If you ask me, I would say it still belongs to be a part of human geography. Now, why it is divided here, these two, we'll just see in a moment of time. First, we'll start with this aspect. Okay, physical geography, further divided into geomorphology, climatology, oceanography, and biogeography. If you remember or if you have just seen the diagram that we saw or the slide that we saw before this slide was involving all this geomorphology, which also is studied under geology along with geography, is the study of the configuration of the Earth's surface, the processes that take place. And in fact, this is going to be a major constituting part of the of our paper one, semester one. Semester two will include climatology, also called as meteorology. Now, again, there is a slight difference when we speak about climatology and meteorology, which would include the study of the atmosphere, composition, structure, the energy associated with the atmosphere, where does it get it, how does it tend to be spent, and so on and so forth. Oceanography is, of course, the configuration of the ocean floor and, of course, the characteristics of the saline water, the ocean currents, the density, and all these things. So this is what physical geography is all about. And of course, biogeography, which includes two parts, uh, the animal part of it and the plant part of it. Okay. Phytogeography is in relation to the environment or with the plants and environment, and zoogeography is basically animals and environment as such. Coming to the fact, before we study what we are supposed to be knowing under economic geography, this part, which I would believe is something that you are going to do as paper two. Not all of it, of course, but some parts of it are going to be done. As far as human geography is concerned, you have had some of your lectures in human geography last week, so you would know that human geography is to start with the human occupation of the earth, the ethnic composition, in the sense that you'll see that people on the surface of this planet tend to be classified on various bases, and we have used this, and all this is studied under anthropology, and of course, the human occupants of the earth under geography as well. Ethnic it would include, say, how you have what. Of course, now you'll see that the human population is very diverse in various parts of the world, but you'll see that areas around the equator will influence, okay, or rather will be influenced by climatic and other factors in such a way that the type of people found along the equator are going to be somewhat different to the type of people who would be found in the colder regions of the world. That's the northern latitudes, I would say. Then we come to the various races. Ethnic composition would include the various races in the sense the Caucasoid and the Negroid, and of course the Mongoloid, and so on and so forth. Mongoloid is basically those people which we otherwise and in the common sense known to be what are called as the Chinese people, basically because of their eye arrangement and this cheekbone make it very peculiar. Negroid is basically dark complex, people having a dark complexion, and then of course Caucasoid is something to do with the Europeans, and of course then you have the type of hair which could be wavy, which could be curly, which could be straight, and of course the colors of the hair from black to brown, and of course blonde as well. So, and how human beings have adapted to all these things will be done under human geography. The evolution of man, particularly, is a very important part which will be studied as far as your paper 2, semester 1 is concerned. Then, another aspect under human geography is the sheer number of the human beings on this planet, which is studied under what is called as population geography. The growth of population. Now, you'll see that in the anthropogeography part of it, here you're looking into different types of individuals. In population geography, you're putting all of them together and you start counting them and you see how they are distributed. Okay, and of course, what is the language they speak and how mobile is that particular section of population and so on and so forth. Then another part of human geography is cultural geography, wherein we have the spatial patterns of different cultures and the impact of the environment on different patterns. And in fact, you'll see that many practices also, okay, it could be religious practices, it could be social practices and other practices are influenced by, do get influenced by geography. Then when you have man and you have, say, civilizations and civilizations induced by culture, okay, these settle down, and this is studied under, the settlement is studied under settlement geography. You have two basic divisions of that, and that's rural settlements and urban settlements. Of course, in between you have a lot of fringe areas, but on a very broad scale and going by the respective definitions, you have them divided as rural settlement and urban settlement as. And finally, you have political geography, where you have the different types of political organizations in a particular area and how these people vote and so on and so forth. Oh, interestingly, you'll see that all these parts of human geography do not at any point of time speak about the economy of anything associated with human populations as such, because that economy is associated with economic geography. You see that I could relate both of them to
Sir, you're not audible.
Okay, sorry people, I lost connection. The college internet maybe has been working after a long time. So I just want to know how long did was I not there on the call or in the meeting? Can somebody unmute and tell me what was the last thing that I was speaking about? Hello, am I audible?
Human geography, sir. Human.
Human geography. Okay, fine, fine. We'll go to that aspect. I'll share that. Okay, are you all able to see the slide? And let me now zoom into human geography. Which part of human geography was the last thing that I was discussing? Human geographyचा कुठला भाग आपण शेवटचा करत होतो? When I lost my connection. And can somebody tell me? Yes, can somebody please unmute and let me know?
Human geography झालता सर. वरचा इकॉनॉमी चालू होता.
Economics.
इकॉनॉमिक्स.
Okay.
हा.
Why are the other students not responding? Okay. The title of this particular section under geography, economic geography, is related to the money aspect of it, and in that sense, you'll see that you can relate it to the various types of economic activities also. Okay, we tend to classify economic activities as primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary and quinary activities of late is a new sense, but not all of them would be applicable here. We have to look at this from a different point of view. Let us say the first part, a part of understanding here is agricultural geography, which would be the food that would be required and for to feed the human population. We have done the population part here. Okay, now we have to feed the population. So this agricultural geography will be, at times also called as nutritional geography. And we start with understanding how the natural factors affect growth of certain agricultural products in certain areas. And then the various land uses, okay, various types of agricultural practices, cropping patterns, and so on and so forth. Of course, this extends into various agricultural policies also of late. You'll see the various aspects about, say the green revolution and food security, etc. All will be studied under agricultural geography. I think we were offline when I said that you have two basic papers at PG level. Okay, this is going to be just one part of the whole study, but at the postgraduate level, we have a separate paper in agricultural geography, and we have another paper as industrial geography also for PG students. We will not be, of course, doing it all of that in that detail, but then not all the products that are extracted out of primary activities are ready to consume, so we have to process these, and this processing is done at under industrial sector. And there is where you have the industrial geography coming in, the development of various industries, the various theories of location of various industries, etc. Now, products of primary activities and products of secondary activities. Let us say agricultural products as an example of the first category, and industrial products as an example of the second category, need to move to make their economic sense work. Yesterday, we were speaking about making the right goods available at the right time and right place as such. So you'll see that profits particularly are related to making the maximum out of the right supply of right commodity at the right place and right time. And yesterday, if you remember, we spoke about raincoats and umbrellas and woolen clothing to start with, okay? And making these things available at the right time obviously would help. And in this whole scenario, the third part of economic geography, that is transport geography, plays an important role. We have different modes of transport. We have different patterns of transport. We have bulk transport systems. We have transport systems which would involve precious commodities and so on and so forth. All of this is going to be studied under transport geography. And of late, you'll see that new forms of transport systems are making it through. And you'll see, you must have heard about the Hyperloop, and of course transport through pipelines and so on and so forth, right from the basic levels of transport, that's use of roads, and of course water, that's land transport, water transport, and air transport as well. Within air, you're going to have national, international. Within that, you're going to have passenger, cargo. So all of this is going to be studied under transport geography. You'll see that all these parts are related to the money generation and exchange of money as far as utilization of these services is concerned, may it be agriculture, may it be industry, or may it be transport systems as well. And then we come to resource geography, that's says commodities beyond food which are of utility as far as human beings are concerned. You see that this mobile phone that I have is going to be a resource. But let me tell you that if I keep this as a switched off, this will not be a resource. The moment I switch it on and I start using it for making calls and passing messages, and of course, right now I'm connected to you because the college network is off. So I'm connected to you through using my mobile network as such. So all of this would involve making this particular thing as a resource. This being shut down and just having the cost of it does not transfer this into a resource. Okay, making this usable, okay, or maximizing the utility of this is going to be resource geography. And then if you put all of this together, if you have the right policies as far as agriculture is concerned, you have right policies as far as industrial development is concerned, if you have right policies as far as your transport systems are concerned, and you have a good network of transport, and over and above that, you are creating resources out of commodities in your country. Obviously, you're leading to the last part of economic geography, and that is the geography of development. Development will occur only when you are transferring commodities into resources. You could use resources for your own population. You could export these resources and generate income out of that. Okay, so right from number 1 to number 5, all of these are somewhere associated to money generation. And that is why this is studied exclusively under economic geography. Of late, economic geography has taken a front seat basically because a lot of world dynamics and world activities do take place on the basis of economic activities and economic geography as such. So on a very broad scale, I would say this is how we divide this. Your paper 1 is going to be towards the left side of your screen. The first semester of paper 1 is going to be geomorphology. The second semester of paper 1 is going to be climatology and oceanography. As far as paper 2 is concerned, it's all going to be human geography. And we are going to do various parts. Of course, human geography has its own dimension. So some parts of these are going to be done as far as your paper 2 in semester 1 and semester 2 is concerned. So we move ahead and come to a very interesting aspect that you would be doing in your practicals, and something that we discussed about when we started introducing ourselves to geography. We spoke about space, we spoke about time, and measuring space and time in a particular scale. Here we are referring to it with reference to a map or a space. Okay, you'll see that you have say what are called as small scale maps, and you have large scale maps. Large scale maps basically include a detailing of a particular area. I purposely put this slide basically because geography students tend to confuse themselves with large scale and small scale. Normally they understand that, okay, large scale is going to be large maps, so a world map is going to be a large scale map. No, a world map is in fact a small scale map, basically because of the fact that it includes lesser amount of details. Okay, as the scale goes on increasing. Now, what do I mean when I say the scale goes? See here, okay, 1 centimeter is equal to 940 kilometers. Okay, that's the first, let's say, the first of this. And then your 1 centimeter is equal to 370 kilometers. What exactly does this mean? In the first diagram to the top of your screen, 1 centimeter on the map includes 940 kilometers on the ground. So obviously, you'll see that the detailing is going to be less. So the scale of clarity is going to be less. As a consequence, this is of I'm looking for a place Atlanta, and you see that in the second map, what they're doing is they're showing 370 kilometers in one centimeter of the map. So obviously, the clarity is not absolute, but it is certainly more than what it was in the earlier map. So the second map is a large scale map. As more details will be available, and you see that as we are moving from up to down, okay, you'll see that we are zooming into a particular place near, say, in Atlanta. That's one place in the United States of America.
So the
And
map
of course,
is not visible.
the map is not visible. Now is it visible?
No, sir. On the screen, it is
No.
still shown that geography is division.
Okay, just let me see what is the problem. Sorry about that. Let me see. Now what are you seeing?
Yes,
Yes,
sir,
yes.
it is visible now.
The map is visible now. Okay, okay. Sorry, please be very, I would say, critical about this, because once I move on this PPT mode, I'm not able to see what exactly you are seeing at your end. So if something that I'm speaking and you are seeing on the screen does not match, please, just like you did right now, you can just switch on your um, volume button, and of course you can speak to me and say that we are not able to see this or that, and so on and so forth. So I'll have to just repeat this, or before I repeat, I would say that maps that we normally use so regularly are at different scales, and many times you come across these technical terms of small scale maps and large scale maps. Now, what does a small scale map mean, and what does a large scale map mean? I've seen that students normally are confused,
Sir, your voice is
and
breaking now.
the opposite way in which they are supposed to be understanding scale. Hello, now still, is it still breaking?
Now, okay, sir.
It's okay now. Fine. This being the first day, we'll have to adjust and try and test. But of course, in times to come, we'll settle down to a particular level. Anyway, so what exactly does a scale mean? A scale of a map is basically the proportionate amount of space that a particular point occupies on a map, and the equal amount of ground distance. So when I'm going to say for example this particular map here, and say this, okay, and I see there are two types of scales, verbal scale and representative fraction. I'm not going to go into the details of these two because we need to do this in our practicals, but because maps are one of the main ingredients as far as geography is concerned, understanding scale in the right way is very important. So when we speak about verbal scale, what does a verbal scale mean? We are actually speaking out a particular scale. When I speak out 1 centimeter is equal to 940 kilometers, I mean that 1 centimeter on the map is equal to 940 kilometers on the ground. So how much of detail am I able to observe? Not much. But let me tell you that this being the smallest scale of all these four, but if I place a world map above this, obviously I'm going to cramp in more space within 1 centimeter if I'm observing a world map. And that is why that is going to be a smaller scale. And as compared to that, this map is going to be a large scale. But when I start with this, and then I compare it with the second map where 1 centimeter is equal to 370 kilometers. So what have I done? I've included more detailing within 1 centimeter. Okay, I moved from 940 kilometers to 370 kilometers. So this is a large scale map as compared to the earlier small scale map. But as I move into further detailing, what I was calling large scale will transfer into a small scale map. So you have to remember the relativity of the scale as such. The moment I'm going to have a more detailed map than the earlier one, the detailed map is going to be large scale, and the earlier one shifts to be a small scale as such. Now here, see what we have done. From 1 centimeter on the paper, equivalent to 370 kilometers on the ground, we shift to 1 centimeter on the paper to 160 kilometers on the ground. So I have further zoomed in on the surface, and you'll see that this zooming is so very obvious here. From the whole map of the United, we move to the Gulf of Mexico area of United States of America, and then we have further zoomed in, and we are now looking at one major state, and the city of Atlanta. And if I zoom into the city of Atlanta, you'll see that this is at the largest scale, basically because I am now seeing 13 kilometers of land area in 1 centimeter. So obviously the detailing is more. So the thumb rule that we understand as far as scales of map are concerned is that if you have detailed information, that's going to be a large scale. if you are going to be.
Your voice is breaking, sir.
Sir, you are not audible.
Ground details, let me tell you, ground details. Okay, if you have a less.
Sir, you are not audible.
Sir, unmute yourself.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
okay. We have lost a lot of time. Okay, by the way, before I forget, please post your attendance in the chat box. Please write down your names in the chat box. As far as the opening of the college for the day is concerned, there is still a lot of confusion, but I stay with what I had told you all earlier, that students of FY who are around 18, some of you all plus 18, some of you all less than 18, should not be in a hurry to come down to the college. And particularly, if you remember, I said this earlier also, that if you are beyond 50 kilometers from SP College, please don't be in a hurry to rush to the college. Even though the government will say that we are starting colleges, but it is the responsibility of the college and the teachers to see that we reach you as far as the content of your subjects is concerned. So though we may start offline, we will also be responsible to reach to those students who would not be coming because of various reasons. And in fact, it is also said that sorry, I'm constantly losing connection on my phone as well as the college Wi-Fi bandwidth as such. But yeah, coming back to the fact that though the COVID numbers are constantly falling down, we need to be careful, because one after the other we are having festive seasons, and the government is relaxing norms for various aspects. Like, say for example, yesterday, or rather from today onwards, restaurants can be open for till 12 o'clock at night, and of course shops till 10 o'clock in the evening, or late evening, let us say. But we have to be very careful, because once we get into the college, there is every possibility that there could be some students who are unwell, and this should not spread within us. So let us take it very easily and at a calm pace. So let us not hurry and come to the college. Yes, I know you are very anxious to come down to the college, but As I said already, and I repeat that health is more important than our anxiety to be in actual live classrooms and meet your teachers and friends as such. Having said that, I'm sorry for all the difficulties that we had in connectivity today. But in times to come, things should improve, and we should have better connectivity and better connectivity as far as understanding of this particular subject is concerned. I'm going to stop here for today, leaving you all around 10-15 minutes early. Next time that we meet, we will try and take up the aspect of scale, and then we are also to understand this aspect along with it. What are the various aspects of geography? What are the various phases of geography, and so on and so forth, before actually we turn into understanding the whole subject of our subject, that is physical geography. That's all for today. Those who have written down their attendance in the chat box can leave. Those who have any queries, they can switch on their mics and ask their queries.
And if you don't have any queries, you can please leave the meeting as well.